The wind howled across the plains that morning, a hollow sound that carried ghosts. Elias Crow, a weathered rancher of 40, rode his chestnut gelding through the cracked earth of his property. The sun had not yet risen, and the world was cast in shades of gray. He liked these quiet hours. They kept him from thinking too long about the past, about Clara, his wife buried 2 winters ago beside the cottonwoods. But that morning, the silence wasn't peaceful. Something rode on the wind, a sound too faint to be the cry of a coyote, too human to be ignored. Elias slowed his horse, listening. Again it came, a ragged, desperate plea carried by the breeze. He thought for a moment it might be a trick of memory, but then it came again, a woman's voice, weak and trembling. He spurred his horse toward the sound, the cold morning biting his cheeks. The cry led him down a dry creek bed, where sagebrush and tumbleweeds grew in tangled knots. There, beneath the shadow of a dead cottonwood, he saw her, a figure wrapped in a filthy, torn blanket, curled in the dirt like a wounded animal. Elias dismounted slowly. The woman stirred at the sound of his boots on gravel. Her face was half hidden beneath matted hair, and when her lips moved, the words came out like dust. Just, "Kill me fast." Elias froze. He'd seen suffering before, in the war, in the mines, in his own home, but never a plea like that. He knelt beside her, unsure if she was delirious or dying. "You're safe now," he muttered, though he didn't quite believe it himself. "Ain't nobody here but me." Her hand shot out, clutching his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes opened wide, wild, sunken, haunted. "Don't look," she rasped. "Please, don't." But Elias couldn't turn away. He pulled back the edge of the blanket to see how badly she was hurt, and stumbled backward in horror. Her skin was a map of torment. Lash marks crisscrossed her back and arms, some fresh, others healed into pale ridges. Strange symbols had been cut into her flesh, circles and crosses intertwined, like some dark ritual. Around her neck hung a length of rope, frayed and blood-stained. Elias swallowed hard, bile rising in his throat. Whoever she was, she hadn't just been beaten, she'd been branded. He looked around the creek bed, searching for signs of who might have left her there. The dirt was torn up with hoof prints, at least 3 horses, maybe more, leading west into the hills. Whoever they were, they'd wanted her to die slow. The woman whimpered again, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll come back. If they see I'm gone." Elias knew what he should do. Ride into town, tell the sheriff, wash his hands of it. He'd done his share of saving souls before, and it always cost him more than it gave. But something in the woman's voice, not fear but shame, rooted him to the spot. He'd once promised Clara he wouldn't turn away from the lost, no matter how broken they were. With a heavy sigh, he removed his coat and wrapped it around her trembling body. "You ain't dying out here," he said firmly, lifting her into his arms. She weighed little more than a child. As he rode back toward the ranch, the first light of dawn bled across the sky, painting the world in gold and red. The woman lay limp against him, whispering words he couldn't make out, names, prayers, or curses. Elias didn't ask which. He only knew one thing for certain. Whatever had been done to her, it wasn't over yet, and by bringing her home, he might have just invited hell itself onto his land. When dawn fully broke over the Crow Ranch, the light did little to ease the chill creeping through the old wooden house. Elias Crow had placed the mysterious woman, still wrapped in that torn blanket, on the spare bed in the room once belonging to his late wife, Clara. The thought made him uneasy, but it was the only room with a working stove and a door he could lock if need be. He fetched warm water and tore an old sheet into strips to clean her wounds. The closer he looked, the stranger the markings appeared, carefully carved lines, symmetrical and deliberate, not random torture. Her body bore the evidence of long suffering, but these marks were something else, something ritualistic. They formed patterns that reminded him of the sermons and symbols he'd once heard, whispered about among old soldiers who'd followed Strange, prophets in the desert after the war. She stirred as he cleaned her arms. Her lips moved faintly. You shouldn't have brought me here, she rasped, eyes half open. They'll come. They always come. Elias straightened, uneasy. Who's they? He asked, but her gaze had drifted toward the window, her pupils wide with terror. The ones who marked me, she whispered. The cleansed. He thought she was delirious. Fever dreams. Still, her fear crawled under his skin. He left her to rest and stepped outside to get fresh air, only to find something that froze him cold. Hoofprints circling the barn. They weren't his. He crouched down. The soil was damp from night frost, the impressions fresh. Someone had been watching. That evening, as shadows grew long, Elias locked the doors and checked his rifle twice. The woman, Mara, she'd told him her name with trembling lips, sat propped against the bedpost, eyes dark and hollow. He brought her stew, but she wouldn't eat. Her hand shook as she reached for the bowl, then withdrew. They'll smell it, she murmured. They can always smell warmth, Elias frowned. You're not making sense. Mara looked up sharply, her voice gaining a sudden edge. You think I'm mad? I thought that too, once, before they carved their truth into me. Before I saw what they do to those who try to leave. He didn't answer. The wind pressed against the windows, whistling through the cracks like a mournful ghost. Later that night, Elias woke to the sound of the horses panicking in the corral. He grabbed his rifle and lantern and went outside. The wind had died completely. Only the frantic snorts of the animals filled the night. When he reached the barn, the lantern light caught something painted across the door, a crimson circle drawn in blood, intersected by a vertical slash. It was one of the same symbols carved into Mara's flesh. Elias's breath hitched. His ranch hands, 2 young brothers who worked the fields, were nowhere to be seen. He searched the bunkhouse and the sheds. Nothing. But near the far fence line, he found a trail of blood leading into the dark. By morning, one of the brothers stumbled back, pale and trembling, unable to speak. The other was gone. Inside the house, Mara sat perfectly still, as if she already knew. They found me, she whispered. They never stop until their work is done. Elias slammed his hat onto the table, anger replacing fear. You're gonna start talking. Who are they? What do they want with you? She met his eyes, her expression a mix of shame and defiance. They call themselves the Cleansed, a congregation, a family, a curse. I was born into them. I ran because I saw what they do to the ones who question their faith. They think pain is purity. That blood opens the way to heaven. Her voice broke, and she touched one of the scars on her arm. I wasn't supposed to survive. Elias stared at her, feeling the weight of something vast and unseen closing in. The strange tracks, the blood, the missing man. This was no superstition. The cult was real, and it had come for her. And by taking her in, he realized grimly, he'd just become their next target. Elias Crow didn't sleep the next night. Every creak of the floorboards, every howl of the coyote made his hand twitch toward the rifle leaning beside his chair. He'd barricaded the doors, banked the fire, and kept watch over the woman sleeping in Clara's old room. Yet the more he stared into the flames, the more he felt the past closing in on him, like a storm he'd once outrun and now couldn't escape. By sunrise, he made a decision. He needed answers. He saddled his horse and left Mara with the rifle despite her trembling protest. They'll find you in town, she warned. They're everywhere. Some wear badges. Some wear crosses, he didn't argue. He just rode hard toward Red Hollow, the nearest settlement, a cluster of weather-worn buildings clinging to the edge of the desert. The town was quiet when he arrived, but not in the peaceful sense. Folks there moved like ghosts, eyes down, voices low. Elias headed straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Reed, an old acquaintance from his army days, listened as Elias explained what had happened. The woman, the marks, the missing ranch hand, the blood symbols. Reed's weathered face stayed still, his eyes fixed on a spot just beyond Elias's shoulder. When Elias finished, the sheriff exhaled slowly and poured 2 shots of whiskey. Elias, Reed said finally, you didn't find trouble. Trouble found you. What in God's name does that mean? It means you brought back something folks here have learned not to touch. Reed's voice dropped. You remember Abel Thorne? Elias froze. The name struck like a whip. He did remember Reverend Abel Thorne, once a chaplain in their regiment during the war. A man of fiery sermons and cruel penance, Thorne had vanished years ago after the massacre at Cold Creek, where a dozen soldiers disappeared under his command. They say he found religion again, Reed continued, but not the kind that preaches forgiveness. He started something out there in the desert, calls it the cleansed. Been whispering about purifying the land ever since. People disappear, cattle get butchered, but no one talks. Elias's stomach turned. You're saying he did that to her? I'm saying if she's one of his, you best get her off your land before the Reverend comes calling. Thorne don't let go of what's his. Reed leaned closer. And for God's sake, don't go digging in his past. There's things better left buried. Elias left without another word, his pulse pounding. He rode back faster than he'd come, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and dread. Thorne had been a monster draped in scripture. If he was behind this, it meant the nightmare wasn't just real, it was personal. When Elias returned, Mara was awake, sitting near the window, clutching the blanket tight. Her eyes flicked toward him, wary, like an animal expecting a blow. You know Abel Thorne, he said flatly. Her face drained of color. He calls himself the shepherd now, she whispered. He says pain is the gate to salvation. I was his vessel, his chosen one. But when I learned what he planned, I ran. Elias's jaw tightened. Planned what? Her gaze locked on his. A cleansing. A ritual to purify the desert. The blood of the fallen will feed the soil, he said. I thought it was madness until I saw the names written in his ledger. What names? Mara hesitated, then spoke softly. Your wife's, Clara Crow. Elias staggered back as though struck. That's impossible, he muttered. Clara died in a fire, nothing to do with him. But as the words left his mouth, the memory of that night flashed before him. The unexplained blaze, the missing cross from her neck, the whisper she'd made before dying. Don't let him find her. Elias's breath caught. Her. He looked at Mara again, truly seeing her this time, the faint resemblance. The locket around her neck with a half-burned photograph. His blood went cold. Mara wasn't just a victim of the cult. She was somehow connected to Clara's past, maybe even the secret Clara had died to protect. And somewhere out in the desert, Reverend Abel Thorne was coming to finish what he started. The following days fell heavy and silent over the Crow Ranch. The animals grew restless, the nights colder. Elias Crow could feel the air itself tightening, as though the land was holding its breath. Mara hardly spoke. When she did, it was in whispers, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting shadows to move. The fear in her had shifted from panic to certainty. She didn't ask if they'd come, only when. On the third night, Elias saw the first signal. A small fire flickering far off on a ridge across the plains, too still to be campfire, too deliberate to be accident. Then in the morning he found another blood mark painted on the ranch's fence post, the circle and slash. The cleansed had found them. He prepared in silence, reinforced the barn doors, scattered extra ammunition across the house, and checked the fuses on the crates of dynamite he'd stored for land clearing. If they wanted his home, they'd pay dearly for it. But beneath that grim resolve there was a weight pressing deeper. Mara's revelation from days earlier, the name Clara Crow, his wife, written in the cult's ledger. He hadn't dared question her again, afraid of what truth might follow. But now, as the wind picked up and the world felt smaller, he couldn't keep it buried. After nightfall, he found Mara sitting beside the fire, wrapped in a shawl, her gaze distant and hollow. Tell me, he said quietly, how did you know my wife's name? Mara's hands tightened around the fabric. Because she saved me, she said at last. I was born in their compound, one of the children chosen for the cleansing. Your wife came to us years ago, before the fires. She was supposed to be a nurse, but she saw what they were doing. She took one child and fled. Elias's breath hitched. And that child? She looked at him then, eyes glistening. Was me. The room spun. Elias gripped the edge of the table, the truth cutting deeper than any blade. Clara had never told him about a child, never explained her late-night rides into the hills before the fire that took her. He thought she'd been hiding grief, not saving a life. She said she'd come back for the others, Mara continued softly. But Thorn found out. He burned the orphan house to the ground and marked those who tried to leave. When she died, he said the blood debt would pass on to me, that I'd be his final vessel. I ran before they could finish it. Elias could barely speak. And the book? The ledger you mentioned? She nodded. It's hidden in the lining of my blanket, their record of every name, every ritual, every man who helped them, including townsmen, soldiers, even lawmen. Elias felt a cold fury stirring inside him. Then we'll use it. End this once and for all. But Mara shook her head, eyes wide with terror. You don't understand. They don't fear death. They worship it. If you fight them, they'll see it as prophecy. Before he could answer, a low rumble shook the ground outside. The horses screamed. Elias snatched his rifle and threw open the door, and froze. Across the dark field, figures were emerging from the mist, torches in hand, moving in silent formation. Men and women, faces smeared with ash, chanting under their breath. At their head, a tall figure cloaked in black raised a burning cross. Even from a distance, Elias could feel his gaze. Reverend Abel Thorn had come. Mara's breath hitched. It's the offering, she whispered. They mean to finish it. Elias slammed the door shut. Then they'll die trying. He moved with grim precision, handing Mara the revolver, loading shells, cutting lamp wicks to prepare the traps. The walls trembled under the growing chants outside. As the torches encircled the ranch, Elias caught sight of one face among the cultists, a badge glinting faintly in the firelight. Sheriff Reed. His heart sank. They weren't just surrounded. They were betrayed. Mara clutched his arm, trembling. If they take me alive, they'll use me to call the fire again. Don't let them. Elias met her eyes, haunted, determined. Not this time, he said. No one burns tonight but them. Outside, the Reverend's voice rose above the chanting, deep, commanding, terrible. Bring forth the vessel, he thundered. The desert must drink. Elias took position by the window, finger tightening on the trigger. The war he thought he'd left behind was coming home. The siege began with silence, the kind that swallows everything, the wind, the insects, even thought. Then came the chant, rising from dozens of throats outside the ranch house, a rhythmic, feverish hymn that made the windows tremble. Elias Crow crouched behind the window frame, rifle steady, eyes narrowed. Beside him, Mara knelt, clutching her revolver, her breath shallow. The torches outside cast a hellish glow across the yard, turning the familiar landscape into something unreal. He counted shadows moving closer. 10, maybe 15 cultists circling the property. They carried crude crosses, hooks, and lanterns filled with black smoke. At their center walked Reverend Abel Thorn, tall, gaunt, his face painted white with ash, his voice rolling like thunder. The vessel returns to the flame. The blood shall cleanse! Elias's hands clenched. The sight of Thorn dragged old memories from the mud, Cold Creek, the screams, the smell of burning flesh. He'd followed that man once, believed his words about divine purpose. And now, years later, Thorn was back, leading monsters in the name of salvation. A shot cracked through the air. The bullet punched into the side of the barn. Elias ducked, returning fire. The ranch erupted into chaos, gunfire, shouting, the neighing of terrified horses. He fired again and again, taking down the torchbearers, but the cultists didn't run. They advanced through the flames, chanting even as they fell. Mara crawled toward the table, clutching something beneath her blanket. Elias turned just in time to see her pull out a thick, weathered book bound in blood-stained leather. The ledger, she said. The proof. He grabbed it, flipping through the pages. Inside were columns of names, hundreds of them, victims, towns, donations, and among them a section marked The Faithful. His stomach twisted as he read familiar names. Sheriff Reed, Mayor Lawson, even men from the army regiment he once served in. The cult wasn't some backwoods sect. It was a web that stretched across the territory. If we can get this to the marshal in Dry Creek, Elias said, we can tear this whole thing down. Mara shook her head fiercely. You don't understand. That book is cursed. It's what binds them. The Reverend writes the names of those who die for him inside it. That's how he claims their souls. You can't use it against him. You can only destroy it." Elias hesitated. Logic told him to keep it. Proof meant justice. But a whisper deep inside warned him that she might be right. The air itself seemed to hum around the book as though it were alive. Outside, Thorn's voice boomed, "Elias Crow! Soldier of the lost! You once bled for me, now bleed again." Elias's fury surged. "You'll get your blood, preacher," he muttered, grabbing the dynamite crate and a length of fuse. "But it won't be mine." He handed Mara his revolver. "If they take this place, you run. You hear me?" Mara shook her head. "You won't survive this alone." "Then we both go down fighting," he said. They moved like soldiers, barricading windows, lighting fuses. The cultists charged through the smoke and fire, their chants turning into shrieks. Elias met them with bullets and flame. He shot Reed through the chest as the sheriff tried to breach the door, then hurled a lit stick of dynamite into the yard, sending bodies flying in a rain of dirt and embers. Through the chaos, Reverend Thorn strode forward untouched, his voice echoing like thunder. He carried no weapon, only a burning staff. "The vessel is mine!" he bellowed. Before Elias could fire, Thorn raised his hand, and Mara screamed, collapsing to her knees. The carved symbols on her skin began to glow faintly in the firelight, pulsing like veins of ember. Thorn laughed. "Do you see? She was never yours to save, Crow. She is my creation, my offering." Elias lunged toward her, grabbing her shoulders. "Fight it, Mara! You hear me? He don't own you." For a moment she looked up, her eyes burning with both pain and defiance. "Then help me finish this," she gasped. Elias turned to the table where the blood book lay open. Thorn was advancing. The flames crept closer. Elias made his choice. He tore the pages from the book, scattering them into the fire. Thorn screamed, a sound inhuman, like the desert itself crying out. The cultists faltered, their chants breaking into confusion. Mara collapsed, the glow fading from her scars, but Thorn's rage only grew. "You have damned us all!" he roared. "Now you will burn in our place." Elias looked at the preacher, then at the dynamite fuse burning low. "Maybe so," he said quietly, "but I'll take you with me." The world exploded in light and fire. The explosion tore through the night like the wrath of God. Fire engulfed the ranch, swallowing the barn, the fences, and the figures of the cultists who'd surrounded it. The shockwave threw Elias Crow backward into the dirt. His ears rang, his vision swam, but he was alive. Around him, the world burned. He coughed through the smoke and staggered to his feet. The flames painted the horizon in orange and black. The cleansed screamed as their robes caught fire, their chants turning to agony. Yet through the chaos, one voice still rang clear, Reverend Abel Thorn's shouting over the roar, "You cannot kill what is chosen." Elias turned, spotting the preacher's tall silhouette against the blaze. Somehow Thorn had survived, his face cracked with soot and blood, his eyes alight with fanatic fire. Behind him, the burning cross he'd carried now stood like a pillar of hellfire. "Mara!" Elias shouted, searching through the smoke. He found her near the porch, half buried under debris, coughing weakly. He pulled her free, his hands blistering from the heat. She looked pale, her eyes half closed but alive. "Elias," she whispered. "You should have let me die." He shook his head fiercely. "Not after what they've done. Not after what you've survived." But she grasped his arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand," she said, voice breaking. "When you burned the book, you broke the bond, but not his faith. Thorn believes my death will finish the prophecy. He'll burn everything until he gets it." As if on cue, a shadow fell over them. Thorn approached slowly, dragging a broken staff. The fire reflected in his eyes like twin suns. "She speaks the truth," he rasped. "Her blood must end this. The desert demands balance." Elias stepped in front of Mara, rifle raised, though he knew it was nearly empty. "You want blood, preacher?" "Take mine," Thorn smiled, a hollow, terrible thing. "I already did years ago. Every soul you killed at Cold Creek bled for me. You were my first disciple." Elias froze. The truth hit him like a blow. He'd long buried the memory of that massacre, the day Thorn ordered them to burn the enemy camp, civilians and all. Elias had obeyed. He'd spent years trying to forget it. "You made me a murderer," Elias said through clenched teeth. "I made you pure," Thorn answered. With a roar, Elias charged. The two men collided in the dirt, the rifle firing uselessly into the ground. They grappled among the burning wreckage, fists and fury. Thorn's strength was monstrous, driven by obsession. He struck Elias again and again, shouting scripture twisted into madness. But Elias fought with something deeper, a lifetime of guilt, loss, and rage. He grabbed a shard of burning wood and plunged it into Thorn's chest. The preacher staggered back, laughing even as blood poured from his mouth. "You can't stop the cleansing," he wheezed. "It's already begun." Elias didn't answer. He lit the last stick of dynamite and hurled it into the burning barn, where barrels of oil and ammunition lay waiting. Then he grabbed Mara and ran. The second explosion came like thunder splitting the earth. The ranch erupted in a sea of fire. Thorn disappeared in the inferno, his screams devoured by flame. Elias and Mara were thrown to the edge of the canyon, where they collapsed as the world burned behind them. When dawn came, the fire had died, leaving only blackened ruins and silence. The land that once held Elias's home was now a graveyard. He sat beside Mara, his arm wrapped protectively around her. She stirred, her voice weak. "Is it over?" He looked out at the smoldering wreckage. "For now," he said. "But there's no going back." She turned to him, her face streaked with ash and tears. "You lost everything?" Elias shook his head slowly. "Not everything." He helped her onto his horse, the two of them riding east toward the rising sun. Behind them, the Crow Ranch faded into smoke and memory. The desert wind carried the last echoes of the cult's chant. Now just a whisper, then silence. As they rode, Mara closed her eyes and murmured the same words she'd spoken the day they met. "Just kill me fast." Elias looked at her, his voice rough but steady. "No," he said. "You're gonna live." That's how we end it. The horizon blazed with new light, the first clean dawn either of them had seen in years. For the first time in a long while, Elias Crow didn't feel haunted. The past had burned away, and in the ashes something like redemption began to grow.